Hello, everyone. I am so excited to have this conversation with Derek Gaunt. We spoke with him back in December, and you might be thinking, oh my goodness, who is this person with this crazy hair? You might be thinking, I don't have anything I don't have anything to listen to her for. Why am I scrolling past this live? You might be thinking, I don't have anything to learn about negotiation. I'm already a negotiator and I'm excellent at it.
Hmm.
But I have something to share with you. You need to learn about what your personality type is and what other personality types are for negotiation. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with Derek Gaunt. He is a negotiations trainer and coach with Black Swan Group. And he is the author of Ego, Authority, and Failure. If you haven't picked up that book, it is a must read and it will help you in all your conversations. So, with that, I'm going to welcome Derek to the stage.
Hey, Brittany,
Welcome.
how are
Welcome.
you?
I'm good. Good to see you again.
Good to be seen again.
Oh man, I've been looking forward to this interview since December. And let me tell you, I've gotten so many just accolades for what you've been able to teach people from the last conversation we've had.
Excellent.
And I for myself, I had to reread some things, listen to the video myself, and apply. Application is the best way to learn. So with that, just a quick recap. Wanted to spend a little time, just a little time, on what we covered last time back in December to bring people up to speed. We talked about a couple tools in negotiation, and I'm going to just quick run through them
Okay.
and hopefully just bring people back up to speed. So the first thing, mirroring. Repeating something around what someone has said in order to convey that you're listening and you understand what they're saying. Labeling, very similar, to convey a similar message, that you understand what someone is saying, but you're saying it seems like, it looks like, it feels like, and sharing what you believe they're sharing in your own words. Uh, in addition to that, we talked about accusations, audits.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a stab at it when we were jumping on the call here today about what people might be thinking as they're scrolling past this particular live here. Um, just getting in front of what people are thinking in order to address the concerns, address the initial thoughts around what people might be thinking in order to really be contrarian to what you're about to say. You address those things first before you get into what you want to share about what you have to desire. So we talked about those things. Did I miss anything, Derek? How did I do on what we just covered?
That was a pretty good summary.
Okay.
For the mirroring, it's repeating back the last 1 to 3 words. All you have to do is remember the last 1 to 3 words that came out of your counterpart's mouth, and you're going to be in good shape. Accusations audits are addressing the negative
Mhm.
opinions, assumptions, and impressions that the other side has about you, has about the conversation, or has about the circumstance. If they were standing on a street corner with a megaphone and they were hurling invectives about you and what you represent, what would you want to stand next to them and deny? That is where your accusations audits lie.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification. Always looking for adjustment and improvement to my understanding about it too. So excellent. You guys, if you want to look up the last conversation that we had, we're going to go ahead and post that in the chat so people have access to all the great information that was shared back from December. We're going to get that in the chat shortly. And then what we're going to hop into today is, what type of negotiator are you? So I've done some research, and if you guys haven't picked it up, You need to pick up this book, Ego, Authority, and Failure. Derek is the author, and the foreword is by Chris Voss. What I would like to dig in today is how you even came up with what different types of personality types there are in the first place. I understand you came up with it by using sort of a different scale of conflict handling models.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'd be great to just kind of get that foundation of how was it really established, those personality types.
Well, there are different conflict personality type models that are out there. All of them, in my opinion, were complicated. Um, and so the whole, one of the drivers, not the whole driver, but one of the drivers behind the Black Swan method is that it was developed primarily in the law enforcement arena. And what cops want more than anything else is something practical, simple, easy for recall. And so when you look at these different conflict personality models that are out there, they tend to overcomplicate it. So we took what we were seeing in academia and we dumbed it down, we watered it down, if you will, to three different types. Other models you'll have 5 to 7 different personality types. We boiled it down to 3 because a lot of them tend to blend. A lot of them tended to share the same characteristics. So we boiled them down to 3 personality types: assertive, analyst, and accommodator. Now, when we talk about negotiator personality types, we're talking about what your default is. We're not talking about who you are in your day-to-day life, because everybody in their day-to-day life knows that they need to borrow from each one of those camps in order to function in their professional and in their personal lives. But everybody has a default. When you've got skin in the game, when pressure is on, you're being threatened or otherwise attacked, you have a default. Do you attack back? Do you figuratively or literally run? Or do you try to make friends during the attack? And that pretty neatly sums up the characteristics of each: the assertive, the analyst, and the accommodator. And I'm not here to tell you that one's better than the other. I'm here to tell you that all 3 types bring something valuable to the table. But you need to know what your default is.
So how do you figure that out, Derek? How do you figure out what you are, and then how do you identify that in someone else?
If I started hurling personal invective, you and I are in a negotiation about, you pick the topic, and all of a sudden I tell you, Brittany, I'm tired of you lying to me. Your company has proven that it is incompetent in all facets. I don't even know why I'm in the room with you right now. You clearly don't have the same intellect to be at the table with me. That's going to cause a negative emotional response on your part. That negative emotional response is going to cause you to behave in a certain way. So you have to ask yourself, what is that way that you would respond? So if I figuratively smash you in the face with a brick, how are you going to respond? Are you going to fight me back?
For me personally, I'll probably be, I'll listen, I'll hear you out. I'll listen to everything that you have to say and just sit there still and then say, what can we do? What can we do to make this work? Because you've been coming at me with all of these allegations, but what's the real crux of the matter? And that's how I would have kind of gone about that.
All right. So it sounds to me like you are more of the analyst type, but I want you to really think about that. And then when I say you, I'm talking about everybody listening. Think about, you got skin in the game, the pressure's on, and a complete jerk to you. What are you going to do? Now, we have found anecdotally that the world breaks up pretty neatly into thirds. We've conducted an exercise enough times with enough people to know that roughly thirds. Third of the population are assertives, a third are analysts, a third are accommodators. What does that mean to you? That means that there's a 66% chance that the person you're sitting across from, view of the world that's different than yours, which kind of undercuts the golden rule, right? The golden rule is treat everybody as you want to be treated. Well, I'm an analyst. If I treat everybody as I want to be treated, I'm going to be alienating 66% of the people that I deal with. Don't treat them the way you want to be treated. Treat them the way they want to be treated is the mindset that you should have. So basically speaking, your assumption should be when you engage in a negotiation, engage in a difficult conversation, the chances are better than not that the person on the other side of the table is different than you. And then how do you modify your dialogue accordingly? You have to understand what's important to each of the types. There is one thing that each of the types holds in the same regard as they do coming to an agreement or making a deal with you. Okay. For the assertive, it's to be heard and respected. The deal can go to hell in the handbasket as long as you know that they're in charge, they're the person, they're the man, they're the woman, whatever. For the analyst, it's data and information. I'm an analyst. If the deal goes into the toilet, I don't care because I've been made smarter because of the interaction. I don't care because I was able to verify some of the data I already had. And for the accommodator, it's the relationship in the moment. Now, just based on the names that we've attached to each of the three personality types, you got to ask yourself, well, which one do you think is the most problematic? And most people default to thinking that the assertive is the most problematic. That's the person that they dream about when they start to think about a negotiation. And the reality is the assertive is actually the easiest one to deal with during a negotiation because all you got to do is shut up. They're going to do all the talking. Now, personal experience tells me it's the accommodator that's the most problematic because the accommodator will, because they're so beholden to the relationship in the moment, they'll say yes to almost anything and not mean it because they don't want to let you down in the moment. The accommodator will give you a yes, knowing full well they have no intention on executing. But they'd rather tell you that by email 2 weeks after the fact, or they'd rather tell you by phone 2 weeks after the fact, and that's 2 weeks that you've wasted waiting on them to act when they had no intention from the beginning.
Wow. Well, thank you for that comment, Maureen. I'm so glad that this book changed my life. It's really, really helpful to know how much negotiation has helped just with understanding personality types. I want to dig into this accommodator personality type a little bit more because Derek, you mentioned they're the hardest because they might say yes in the moment. But that's within that one conversation. How do you prepare for that when you know that you're about to enter into a negotiation with an accommodator so that you're going to get the best out of that conversation?
With the accommodator, you're going to have to hit them with a variety of implementation questions throughout the conversation. Okay. When they agree to do something, we're going to pepper them with what's that going to look like? Who do you have to talk to back in your organization to make sure that we are on track? What are we going to do if we find out we are off track? And I'm going to pepper them in a deferential way. I'm not going to about it in a deferential way. I want them to articulate for me what their next steps are going to be. And your gut, your intuition is going to tell you how much you need to do. But I know going in, if I've already labeled this person as an accommodator, for whatever reason, I am going to make sure that I get them to explain exactly what they're going to do to hold up their end of the agreement. The more you get them to speak that into the air, it's tantamount to a public promise, and a public promise puts internal pressure on them to stay true to their word, right?
Yeah.
They don't. People want to be viewed as consistent in word, thought, and in action. And once they verbalize it, it's almost it's tantamount to a contract.
Hmm.
And that's what I want to have before them, before I let them out of the room, because I've been told by an accommodator, you can't believe everything that comes out of my mouth, but I'm not intentionally trying to lie to you. Now I'm just going to let that sink in for a little bit. You try to get your head around that. That's the thinking of an accommodator. You can't believe every word that comes out of my mouth, but I'm not intentionally trying to lie to you. It still hurts my head to try to figure out that that train of thought. So with the accommodators, you have to hit them with what and how implementation questions often, to make sure that what they've agreed to, they're going to stick to.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Derek. There's a book that I'm familiar with called Conversations for Action.
Mm-hmm.
And what he outlines in that book, Fernando Flores is the author. He outlines, and he's from academia, and it's quite detailed and intense, but how he lays it out is really good. He expresses that when we make agreements about expectations of work, you have to really clearly outline what those conditions of satisfaction are. The person who's meant to deliver on those conditions, they have to repeat it back to you with clarity, what those conditions are that they intend on delivering. And then the requester needs to then respond saying, these conditions that you plan on delivering will now meet my need. And I think about that when you're talking about what that conversation might look like with an
Mm-hmm.
accommodator,
Mm-hmm.
so
Very.
that you can just get clarity and almost do three-way communication with them.
Yeah, and with the accommodator, it's you're almost going to feel like you're going overboard with it. But the reality is, you have to, and because they want to keep you happy in the moment. One of my favorite analogies is the accommodator. The accommodator will walk you up to the edge of a minefield and not tell you,
Wow.
knowing that your next step could be your last. But they want to keep you happy in the moment. And so the worst type match for an accommodator is another accommodator. You get two accommodators in the room, nothing's going to get done, and they'll have fun doing it. I mean, if you happen to be a fly on the wall and you listen to the conversation, you'd think there was a party going on and everything was going.
I know. Well, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Well, hopefully Derek can hop back on shortly. I know he's getting to a good point about how accommodators are do not work well together, or accomplish quite a lot together. I'm really interested in what we're going to hit on when we get into analyst, because I had suspected I was an analyst, and Derek, he also mentioned he's an analyst. So it'd be really interesting to hear what that approach might be. Assertives, I have a lot of assertives in my life, particularly because of the industry. But I mean, Derek said we divide up equally into thirds. So, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to understand what that looks like. So, hopefully, we get Derek back on here shortly. I hope you guys are enjoying the conversation. Sheila White, I saw your message there. Thanks for putting a note in the comments there. Maureen, I hope you're enjoying as well. Andrew, great and complicated topic. Yes, it's a complex topic indeed. And that's something for me personally, as someone who has gone through um, over 13 years of experience in the owner's rep world, I've really been interested in negotiation and having productive conversations. And so I'm super excited to continue this conversation. We do have Derek back online. Um, we lost you there for a moment, but we're happy to have you back.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened, but let's keep rolling.
Right.
Where did I leave off?
You were talking about how accommodators, when they speak with each other, that can be one of the most challenging situations. And
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
expounding on that point.
yeah. They won't come to an agreement, but they're okay with it because it's the interaction in the moment that they're happiest with.
Okay, great. So, I mean, it's not great, but so what are the better combinations, right? You said accommodator, bad. What about, analyst and accommodator? How do those work together?
Analyst, I mean, everybody tolerates the accommodator. Analyst understands who the accommodator is and what puts wind in their sails. And so an analyst has no problem in working with the accommodator. That is a better match.
Okay.
Analysts and assertives, two sides of the same coin, and neither one likes working with the other. The analyst views aggressive conversation as a complete waste of time. They're not going to run from conflict, but they're not going to engage in it if they don't have to because they believe it's a complete waste of time. And so, being the same or two sides of the same coin, the analysts and the assertives are like oil and water. Assertives love dealing with the accommodator because the accommodator will get smacked around the room and not say anything about it. And that's what the assertive likes to do, is smack people around the room. And analysts won't stand for being smacked around the room. We'll just get up and we'll solve our own problem in another manner.
I would love to dig into analysts a little bit more. I mean, you mentioned you're tending towards the analyst type. I mean, I would love to hear an example of how you've negotiated with an analyst point of view.
Your point of view has to take a back seat because, again, the chances are very good that I'm going to sit down with either an accommodator or an assertive, which means where I want to go in the conversation doesn't really matter until I appeal and appeal to their senses and appease them, regardless of whether they're an assertive or an accommodator. So, for example, I as an analyst, if you invite me to a party and all I know is you, and I show up at that party, you know where you're going to find me? You're going to find me with my back against the wall, watching the room. I'm not going to be rude. I will engage people if they engage me, but I'm not going to be bopping around that room, mingling with the crowd. I know you and only you, and I'll probably interact with you a little bit. Other than that, if you want to find me, just look at the walls. You'll find me holding up one of the walls, because that's what I do as an analyst. And I'm reserved. Some people call it reclusive. Most people view me as aloof and rude. It's not who I am once you get to know me. But until you get to know me, I'm very reserved because I'm deliberate about what I let out of the bag. When dealing with an accommodator, that is a problem, because an accommodator wants that constant back and forth. So if I'm an analyst and I'm sitting back and I'm not saying a lot, or I'm appearing to be contemplative, it's going to set the accommodator off. Meaning they're going to wonder to themselves, what did I just do to offend this guy? Why isn't he talking to me? Why doesn't he like me? Why is he being mean? That's what's going through the mind of an accommodator. What's going through the mind of an assertive? He just shut up. He's not talking, so he must want me to run this entire thing. And the assertive will keep talking. And I'm continuing to gather information. Now, I have to preempt that.
Yeah.
Going in. You talked about the accusations audits earlier. I have to preempt that going in. So if I'm going in with an accommodator, I am going to say to the accommodator, look, from time to time in this conversation, it's going to appear like I'm disengaged. You're going to think that I'm being rude. You're going to think that I'm being aloof. You're going to think that maybe you said something to offend me. None of those are the case. I'm just going to, I just think a lot, right? So I set it up so that now the accommodator knows, oh, if he goes quiet, he told me he was going to do that. It's cool. By the same token, I'm going to tell the assertive, look, from time to time in the conversation, I may go silent. I may start taking notes. Doesn't mean that I want you to fill that silence necessarily. Doesn't necessarily mean I want you to keep going because you feel like you have to convince me of whatever. It's just my makeup. Accusations audits up front to prep them for how they should deal with me as an analyst. And so those are the kind of considerations I have going into the conversation once I've identified, at least tentatively, who they are.
Okay. So yeah, I think that for me, because I mean, you mentioned it seemed like I was kind of going the analyst. I'm fitting that personality type more. That is super, super helpful. And when you took off for a little bit, that's what I was letting the audience know that I was most interested in. But I do not want to neglect the assertive. How should the assertive prepare for conversations with the analyst or the accommodator?
Again, it's knowing what makes them tick. What makes the analyst tick? Data and information. So as an assertive, I'm going to back up my pontifications with data and information because I know that's what floats the analyst's boat.
Okay.
I'm not going to press the analyst for a decision during the initial conversation because you're not going to get it. You and I, if you're negotiating with me, let's say for the sake of this discussion, you're an assertive, and we get together and we're hashing out whether or not we're going to partner in this endeavor together. I'm not going to give you an answer on that first interaction. I need to go back and think. So as an assertive, you need to understand time is money for the assertive. He wants an answer. She wants an answer right away. The analyst is not going to give you that answer right away. So you gotta put, again, your desires, your wants on the back burner. The accommodator views you as being domineering and aggressive. Your tone, regardless of whether you're dealing with an analyst or an accommodator, your tone is probably your number one tool. It's also your biggest detriment. You view yourself as being direct and straightforward and no nonsense. People view you as being a bully, being loud, being arrogant. And so even though that's not who you are, that's not your intention, that's how you are viewed. So those are the things that you have to tamp down in order to be successful with interacting with the other two. The main thing is avoid generating negative emotions in your counterpart. And if you're coming across as a jerk, as a bully, as being rude, you are in fact producing negative dynamics and negative emotions, and you are in effect making your counterpart dumber. You just are. There's no way around that. When I'm being attacked, or when I view myself as being attacked or insulted, my amygdala fires up. And when my amygdala fires up, it impedes what's supposed to be going on in my prefrontal cortex. And the assertive may be making the most brilliant argument in the world. I'm not listening because I'm in fight or flight mode at this point. And so your tone, the way you deliver your message is your number one tool, in that you can reach into people's brains and you can dial them up and dial them back just based on your tone of voice. And so if the assertive understands that, they will modify their behavior and their delivery and their cadence accordingly so as to not produce those negative emotions and dynamics.
Okay. What kind of accusations audit should they enter into the conversation with each?
Again, it's going to be, listen, I'm very animated when I talk. Sometimes I stand up. Sometimes I smack my hands down on the table. I'm not trying to manipulate you. It's not done to try to anger you. I'm not trying to get a rise out of you. I'm not trying to intimidate. It's just who I am. If at any point during this conversation it becomes too much, tell me, and I'll back off. By verbalizing that in that fashion, it initiates compliance on their part because they'll go back to that public promise. They have spoken it into the air. And so they're more likely to stay true to what they just said. But it also tells the counterpart, it puts the counterpart at ease. Now they're expecting the behavior. It's not a surprise. And if it's not a surprise, it's less likely to generate a negative response emotionally.
So the accusations audit, when you're entering into any conversation with any one of the personality types, it appears that that's the most important thing to consider doing before you enter into any of these conversations. Is that true from your perspective, Derek?
Yeah, without question, without question. Because at the end of the day, I want them to be clear of mind. I want them to be at ease. I want them to not be preoccupied with negative emotions and dynamics. And it's the fastest way for you to build trust and rapport is by pointing a negative light back at yourself. That sets you apart from everybody else. Nobody does that. Most people are afraid of mentioning a negative opinion, assumption, or impression because they believe that if it's not there, I may remind the people that it may be there, and that's what they'll focus on. So I'm not going to say it at all. But the reality is, it takes a certain level of courage for you to point that negative light back at yourself and say, hey, I know you're thinking this about me. And when you start to articulate things that have not been said yet, oh my gosh, are you serious? How much more of an example of being dialed in do they need? When you start to tell them or you start to preemptively label negatives that they haven't spoken yet, you almost look like a mind reader. And so when you start to identify things that they haven't said, there's no clear demonstration that you're attempting to see the world through their eyes.
You know, recently I took a class with someone who is really successful in sales for all types of products across the world. Her name is Forbes Riley, and she teaches the class about pitching. One thing that she talks about is making sure that you understand about yourself, what your relatability factors are, in order for you to bring those up when you're about to enter into a conversation about what you wanting to share about your product, right? So, as an example, if you're speaking to other technologists, you'll say something like, you know, I grew up around technology, you know, always had a knack for, you know, figuring out how technology works, and I love the elevation of cell phones or whatever it is. Like, just pick something and call out that particular thing about yourself that can connect with the other individual. So I wanted to just have that note there and then come back around to what you're saying, just to describe the negative things that people may be thinking about you, to your point, kind of get into appear like you're that mind reader, but it's definitely taking a different spin on looking at yourself and what that other person might be perceiving about you before you even think about how to relate with them. So just throwing it out there, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So a couple things. The accusation audit demonstrates that you're seeking to understand before you are trying to be understood. That is the entire sequencing of the Black Swan method. Tactical empathy first, your goal, your objective, your pitch, your ask comes last. Now, as to whether or not you need to accentuate your relatability, what it sounds like the person that you're talking about, it sounds like they are talking about common ground.
Mhm.
Relatability is tantamount to common ground. And you can make deals. You can close sales with common ground. But if you rely too heavily on it, and it's not there, you're going to be in trouble.
Okay.
And so I'd be very cautious about pursuing common ground as your only strategy. The second problem with common ground is you've made an assumption. You've made an assumption about your counterpart that they can resent. And the assumption is, oh, your son plays baseball? My son plays baseball. Buy my stuff. And again, it's not that you won't make any deals, but you're leaving money on the table, especially if there is no common ground. One of the things I used to hate as a cop, this was many, 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 many years ago when I was a road cop, and I saw a traffic violation. And I light the guy up, pull him to the side of the road, and before I even get to the car, there's a badge hanging out of the window. Now, this guy has already made an assumption about me that because he threw a badge out of the window, I'm going to let him walk. And so there was nothing that irritated me more, because he assumed that common ground, he assumed because of common ground that I was going to act in a certain way. So just be very careful with trying to make yourself relatable. If the common ground is legit, then go for it. But if it's not, and you press for it, you're going to be in trouble. Think back to what we used to do in hostage negotiation. How much common ground do you think I had with any of the people that I dealt with on the inside? The answer was none. I had no common ground with any of them, and I was successful at least 93% of the time in getting them to surrender. And so compare and contrast that to your success rate at influencing people into doing what you need them to do. I would bet that the best people listening to this right now, probably somewhere around 40%. And if you didn't rely completely on common ground and you relied more on just the tactical empathy, how much could you increase your success rate in influencing other people? So just those are my thoughts on being relatable to other people. Common ground can be a slippery slope.
That's really, really good. And for the record, that wasn't the only tool that she was recommending, but to your point, I really like that you're calling out that you cannot rely on that too much, and don't dig into that too deep. Perhaps find out what is more accurate for you to relate to, so that it's a more honest conversation, if there is anything at all. But
Right.
and then focus more on tactical empathy, and focus more on trying to address those accusations, doing those accusations audit in the beginning.
Yeah, that lays the groundwork. That tells them that before this conversation even got started, she's showing me that she wants to understand the world as I see it. And that's going to cause them to open up a little more. And as they open up a little more, you find out more information. As you find out more information, you're digging for more information. And it's all with using labels, mirrors, paraphrasing, dynamic silence to get that information out. And what you're doing is you're lending an ear to them at a level that they don't experience throughout the majority of their day. And it feels good. Listening is the cheapest concession that you can make to another person. And most people don't do it on that deeper level, so that when it does occur, it's like, wow, I can't believe this. And I'm going to keep talking and talking because nobody's ever listened before. You don't, and forgive me if I said this back in December, but it bears repeating. If you don't believe how powerful listening, just listening, can be, go to your local convenience store, drugstore, Starbucks coffee, ask the person behind the counter how they're doing, and whatever response you get, hang a label on that response and watch how much more information they throw up on you, because nobody takes the time. They interact with people all day long. They hear, how are you? 100 times a day. It's a throwaway salutation. And so they know that 99 people out of 100 don't really care how they're doing. That's just how we say hello. So be that one person that when you get the response, you actually label that response and watch how much more information you get.
I'm loving this so much, Derek. I feel like every time I listen to you, I gain something so much more about learning about myself and how I show up and how I don't show up. When you talk about listening and simply just throwing a label on it, to me, it's such a simple yet profound thing. And I think you did dig into that in December, right? We talked about the importance of labels and how it makes people feel like they're understood. To your point about, I mean, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Stephen Covey, that's a lot of his that's one of his tools, right? I
Yeah.
think I think that it's many times overlooked and many times not carried out well, or not carried out at all. There's very little intentionality. How do you build in that intentionality so that you can listen better? Like, what kind of things do you do when you go about your day? Do you do that? How do you put those steps into place in order for you to consistently say, let me be a better listener. Let me be the type of person who will respond with labels. What are those kind of things that you do?
Well, it's more or less second nature now
Okay.
than it was early on, but it became second nature because of a lot of low stakes practice. The coffee shop, grocery store scenario that I just threw out there, that's low stakes practice. You gotta intentionally look for opportunities to practice these skills, and you can't take it for face value that I said it's going to work, and then jump into a $10 million deal with a counterpart and expect to recall and execute with precision. It's just not going to happen. It takes 64 to 67 reps for you to develop a new habit. The easiest way to develop the habit and the quickest way is low stakes practice. Today is Friday. Make today be your label day, and say to yourself, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to look for opportunities to label people in order to get them to continue to engage with me. Saturday, tomorrow, that's going to be my mirror day. I'm going to spend all day looking for opportunities to mirror in order to get a person to continue talking through a point. Sunday is going to be my dynamic silence day. I'm going to intentionally create voids in conversations to get people to open up. And so that's how you get your sea legs under you. That's how you get your traction. That's how you start to strengthen those synaptic connections so that it becomes, quote, muscle memory. So that when you get into that conversation and there's $10 million on the table, you're not fumbling for where you need to go next. You're out of your own head and you're just responding to what your counterpart is giving you.
64 to 67 reps, did you say?
Yep.
So we need to practice these tools, probably each one of them, that many times in order for it to become second nature.
Become a new habit.
A new habit. Okay.
Yeah, to develop a new habit, and that I can't remember the book, but that came from one of a Blue Angels pilot, and he was talking about the precision maneuvers that they do before shows and how long it takes them to develop new flyers with these new habits, and so to develop the barrel roll into a new habit, you got to go through that barrel roll 64 to 67 times. Doesn't make you an expert. It just develops it as a new habit. And then, continue building on that foundation is what increases your expertise.
Excellent. Well, we got some work to do, guys. I know I do. And if you have any questions for Derek here, we're going to wrap up in the next 12 minutes. But I do want to put it out there. If anyone in the audience has specific questions about any of what we talked about today, I'd love to take those in and really get it in front of Derek to see what his response might be. I mean, clearly you have an opportunity to get his book, Ego, Authority, and Failure. And you can definitely dig into that and get some foundational understanding, but you have the man right here. Take advantage of it. So that being said, do you want to talk about negotiations you do in your work? Maureen asked this question.
Yeah. I honestly, Maureen, I don't do a lot of it now. We've got a significant biz development team that does most of our outbound negotiations as far as who we're bringing in as corporate training clients or individual coaching clients. So my job primarily right now is just instructing individuals and corporations in how to apply these practices and principles to their world.
Yeah.
So she says, any tips for negotiating with family triggers with different personalities? Negotiating with family triggers with different personalities. Well, generally speaking, it's always going to be harder for you to exercise the skills when negotiating with family members. Why is that? Because there's emotional attachment going all the way around. And if there are emotional attachments, and if there's the difficult conversation, negative dynamics are going to be at play. I would not often, but I remember times when I would return to work after the weekend and people would ask the typical Monday morning question, how was your weekend? And I would say, not great. I spent all weekend long arguing with my 17-year-old daughter. And they're like, what? You're arguing with your 17-year-old daughter? How come you, Mr. Hostage Negotiator, didn't just negotiate with her? And because I got emotional. And going back to what I said earlier, when you get emotional, you get dumber because of what's going on in your brain. So the tips that I would have, you're going to be triggered during the course of the conversation because you're dealing with difficult family members. When you find yourself being triggered, label it to yourself. Yes, label the emotions that you are feeling. There's a significant research through fMRIs that show that self-labeling emotions diffuses them even on the part of the individual experiencing the trigger. There's one study in particular where they showed people various photographs of horrific images, and when they showed the photograph, they would, because of the fMRI, they could see the activity in the amygdala light up, and then after they showed the photograph, they would say, "What are you feeling right now?" And they would describe what they were feeling: disgust, frustrated, angry, and immediately, as soon as they labeled it, the activity in the amygdala dissipated. And so you can do that in the heat of the moment when you get attacked. And when you're dealing with family members, you're dealing with a difficult conversation. At some point during the conversation, you will be attacked. So mindset, know that going in, try to stay curious during the conversation. And if you indeed are curious during the conversation, it's hard to get triggered, but if you do, label the emotion that you're feeling.
Yeah, I love that response, Derek. Labeling emotions is something that they teach in cognitive behavioral therapy as well, in order to diffuse that feeling for yourself, in order for you to now look at situations closer to reality versus you being wrapped up in that feeling or that emotion. So, what you're describing, the scientific side of things, where you're saying using when using an fMRI, it's easy to see kind of that amygdala, your historic response
Mm-hmm.
light up. It's really interesting to know that that scientific backup matches up exactly with something as simple as labeling how you feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And again, once you do that, to your point, you become more clear. You get clarity back. Your emotions come down, and as a result, your rational thinking comes up.
Yep.
And that's what we're always trying to do for other people. Why not do it for ourselves?
Hmm. Hmm. So you're labeling, you're literally putting a label on the feeling that you're having, but you're labeling, it seems like it feels like, right? You're using those things to just communicate to yourself what's
Mm-hmm.
actually happening. Very
Exactly.
interesting.
Exactly.
Very cool. If there are any other questions, guys, please continue to have them roll in. Really great questions, Maureen. Thank you for offering those up. Um, Derek, what did we not cover that you would feel remiss to not have mentioned in these two discussions, to share with the audience here?
I would say that probably if you are at an impasse, take a closer look at negotiator personality types. When there is an impasse, it's usually the result of type mismatch. Once you have tentatively identified the person as assertive, accommodator, or analyst, it's tentative. You could be wrong. You're going to continue to push through the conversation looking for validation for your label, if you will. So this may be the first time that you're interacting with this person, and based on responses to certain questions or based on your observation, you go, that guy's probably an assertive. That doesn't mean that you rest on your laurels. You're going to continue to test that assumption throughout the course of the conversation, because the reality is you're going to get it wrong from time to time. We had a relationship with a guy for 12, 18 months. We were contemplating putting together some content and producing it together. We realized it probably wasn't going to be a viable idea for us, and we wanted to withdraw from the partnership. Now, we had worked with him 12 to 18 months and basically assumed he was an an assertive, based on how he acted, based on his status in life, based on some of the things that he said. And it turns out, when we were parting company, it turns out that he was more accommodator than we ever gave him credit for being. So make your best guess, but test that guess. You want to know how to cold read somebody to determine where they are: assertive, analyst, accommodator. Ask them how they're doing. Label it and watch their response to your label. That's going to be a pretty good barometer as to whether they're assertive, analyst, or accommodator. Ask them how they're doing, label the response, and then when they respond to that label, that's going to tell you where they're probably going to be in the categories of personality types.
Derek, I'm trying to envision what those responses would be. Can you give an example for the
Well,
assertive as an example?
well, the assertive, once you label it, i.e., shown an interest in them,
Uh-huh.
game on. They're gonna just unload on you as to exactly why their day is so great or why their day is so cruddy. The analyst is, to your label, is going to be probably just, yep. And the accommodator is going to be, oh, thank God somebody's talking to me. And they're going to engage you and go back and forth, and they're going to keep you there for quite some time. So that is my best quick test. Now it's like, back in the day, we used Scott reagent cocaine test kits. If we got blue over pink, it was positive for cocaine, but that wasn't enough to convict at trial. We had to send the cocaine to a laboratory to get it professionally analyzed. So the same way with labeling the response of a person and then listening to their response to the label to determine it's preliminary. You're going to continue to test that throughout the course of the conversation, but it's a pretty good jumping off point.
Very good. I think that provided some clarity for me. And now you're having me second guess whether I'm an analyst or not. Really interesting stuff. Can you be two personality types? Can you swing different directions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most of us can swing. Most of us do swing back and forth during the course of the day. But think about this. I'll leave you with this analogous story that I like to use. You're hiking on a mountain. You're on a path deep in the bush. You round the corner on this path, and there sits a grizzly bear. When you see that grizzly bear, will you A, pull out your hunting knife, square off with this bear and say, I might not win this, but at the end of this bear is going to know it was in a fight? B, same bear, same path. You see the bear, you pull out your GPS, you pull up pre-plotted courses off of the main path because you knew this was probably going to occur. You go off on one of the side paths into the bush, go up into a tree, you take out a sniper's rifle and you kill the bear from a distance? Or do you see same bear, same path, you walk up to the bear, you put your arms around the bear, you give that bear a big hug and you say, I know what your problem is. Nobody understood you as a cub. I'm going to take you home, clean you up, introduce you to my family, and provide you with a hot meal. If you fall into category A, you are an assertive. If you fall into category B, you are an analyst. If you fall into category C, you are an accommodator. What would you do with that bear? Think about that before determining who you really are. Are you going to square off with the bear? Or are you going to snipe it from a distance? Or are you going to take it home?
What a story to leave us off with here, Derek. And I know that story is in your book. Awesome. Thank you so much, Derek. We really appreciate everything you've had to share and teach us today. Thanks again. Let us know where can people learn more about you and get in contact with you.
Info@blackswanltd.com. That'll get to me. Info@blackswanltd.com. Blackswanltd.com is the website for more resources, if you will. I'm on LinkedIn, not as frequently as I would like to be. I was forced to join Facebook, so I'm there now. I resisted for as long as I could, but the boss said I had to make a Facebook page, so I'm there now as well.
So not Clubhouse yet, huh?
He made me do that too. So I downloaded Clubhouse, and I still haven't figured out how to navigate that. So I'm on Clubhouse as well.
We're going to work on that, Derek. We'll work on that.
All right.
All right. Thanks again. I know we're up at time. Thanks everyone for joining.
All right. See you later.
Bye.